All right, well, let's dive into a actual Kaggle notebook where we basically use the Onboard API to extract data from the competition website. So here you see a Kaggle notebook that is already filled out, which you can take a copy of it and save it in your own account and replicate it and sort of adapt it if you want to. But this notebook is really going to step-by-step go through the process of using the API client and to extract different types of data. So let's dive right in. So the first thing that we need to do is to load or install the Onboard API client library into Python. This is done using pip install. This is something you would do from the command line, or if you weren't using a notebook, you do that from the command line. What happens then is once we install it, and we load both the pandas library, which you might be familiar with if you've used Python for data science or taken the edX course. And then you have the client itself, the RTEM client from the Onboard package itself. So what we're going to dive into today is utilizing this API. And previously I showed you how to navigate the Onboard platform to get what's called an API key. You're going to be using that key in this process to extract information from the server or the backend itself. So here's a nice explanation of what an API is. There's kind of a story, kind of a way to connect to what an API is. In a nutshell, an API really is a programmatic way to extract data from a backend server, a web-based server most often. Almost any type of social media or web service or website out there has an API these days for people to programmatically create scripts to extract and interface with that link. APIs are really a link to a service that allows you to query and pull data from them. So we're going to talk about an API in the context of this competition, the RTEM competition, and we're going to get access to some data. I'm going to show you some basics of how to extract that data and play around with it. So the first thing we need to do is get access. We need our API key that we created before. We do that through the process of generating the API key. The API key that you created, you can basically copy and paste into this notebook once you've cloned it from my account. You can either copy and paste it here, or you can use what's called the Kaggle secrets function, which I've done basically. If you go to add-ons, you go to secrets, you can see that I have my hackathon key here. The value is not shown to you because it is a secret. You can put your API key in here in the same way by putting hackathon_key and the value, the API key as a value. And the reason that you do that is if you share it with somebody like I'm sharing with you, you don't want to share your key also. So if I execute this chunk of code right here, it's loading my API key behind the scenes, not showing you that key, that credential. And that basically allows me to access the data from the RTEM API. So I'm going to create that client. There's a little thing called .whoami, which is going to give information about that link. So basically, your link to the website or the backend has been solidified and credentialed, and you can see that right here. So once you credential and you're authenticated in the API, how do you actually extract data from the API using Python? So there's kind of two different ways. We're going to show you the really basic way first, which gives you the fundamentals of an API. And then later we're going to show you how to use what's called an API wrapper, or we're going to use the RTEM Onboard library to extract data, with shielding us away from some of the details we're going to talk about here in a second. So to do it the first way, we're going to use the library called requests. Requests is a Python package that allows us to easily interface with APIs. It has all the different tools and functions that we need, basically. So the first thing we're going to do in that process is we're going to set this variable key using the API key. We're going to post, or basically create a post request, and then we're going to send that to this onboard URL, which is the API URL. We're going to get a response back. You didn't see how that worked because I haven't outputted anything yet. But what we get back is essentially this result is our response. And this is basically us sending a message to the API and getting a message back that it sort of says, yes, you're authenticated. You are a friendly person that should have access. If you got an error at this point, that means that your key is outdated or broken, or you have a typo somewhere. And it's really just that handshake is being confirmed through this message right here. What is this type? This is a dict or dictionary object within Python, which you might be familiar with if you're familiar with Python. And you can call certain parts of that dict or dictionary, the access token being the attribute or the component of that dictionary that you're most interested in. This access token is what you then use to make a handshake to extract data. So, and how to do that? You basically, within Response's library, there's a way that you can create what's called a header. And that header takes the access token that we just created, it packages it into another Python dict object. And then you basically are able to use that header in a function called get. So you're going to send what's called a get request to ask the API for certain types of data. So the first thing that we'll look at is we'll try to extract buildings. So in the competition, there's over 200 buildings. Every building has X number of points, however many points that building has. So let's look at buildings first. That's the highest level of the hierarchy that we're going to be looking at today. So the first thing that we can do is extract an object that has a list of buildings, and we're going to save that in a variable called BDGS, or basically buildings. And it's going to send us a list of dicts or dictionaries. And here you can see the first one that comes in that list is the first building on the list within the back end. This is a building that has a time zone of New York. It's basically located in the Bronx. It's a multi-family place of a building. There's 20 pieces of equipment. There's 1,293 points to this building. And so that's interesting. So let's actually look at that here as kind of a table by taking the JSON object and converting it into a table here that we can look at. So here we see a bunch of these items in this object. So we have, it starts with 0 because that's what the index that Python starts with, and goes to 228, meaning there's 229 rows in this data set. So there's 229 buildings in the data set, and you can learn all about those buildings looking at the metadata that we can see here. And so if we create a data frame of that BDGS, we can apply different things to this data frame to understand how to navigate that data frame and look and see which of these buildings we want to play around with next. So thanks a lot. In the next video, I'll talk about the API wrapper, which is a slightly easier way to extract data than the process we just went through.